It started with a call at 2:13 a.m., the kind of hour that brings only bad news. Sheriff Dana Lockhart blinked against the harsh glare of her phone screen, reading the words Harlan Library intrusion detected. She groaned, pulling on jeans and boots, her service pistol already holstered before her coffee had time to brew. The Harlan Public Library hadn't triggered an alarm in years. Budget cuts left its security system outdated and half-broken. Still, motion sensors shouldn't be picking up anything, especially not at that hour. She radioed dispatch as she drove through the heavy Appalachian mist, the truck's high beams carving tunnels through the fog. Unit 7 en route to the library, she said. Possible break-in. Copy that, Sheriff, came the sleepy voice of dispatch. Want me to wake Eli? Dana hesitated. Deputy Eli Green had pulled a double shift the day before. No, she said. I'll handle it. The town of Harlan was little more than a cluster of quiet buildings and lingering ghost stories. It had once been a thriving coal town, then a struggling logging town, and now just a town trying to forget its past. The library sat at its center like a relic, an old stone building with blackened windows and a roof that groaned during every rainfall. When Dana pulled up, she saw no sign of forced entry. The wrought iron gates stood slightly ajar. She flicked off her headlights, stepping into the low chill. The air carried a strange scent, something earthy, metallic. Inside, the fluorescent bulbs flickered erratically. Books lay scattered on the hardwood floor. Her boots echoed softly as she moved between the shelves. "Anyone here?" she called, hand on her holster. Silence. Then a whisper. Not a voice, exactly. More like paper moving without wind. She turned sharply. The rows of shelves were unchanged, but the air felt heavy, like she had stepped into a vacuum. She moved deeper into the non-fiction wing, and that's when she saw it. A section of shelving near the back, one that hadn't been used in decades, was wrong. The wall behind it, usually stone, had opened into a narrow hallway she had never seen. No renovation records ever mentioned such a passage. The air coming from it was warm, too warm, like breath from a furnace. Dana clicked on her flashlight and called in. "Dispatch, this is Lockhart. There's a structural breach in the library. Might be a collapsed wall. I'm going in to check." She stepped through the threshold, immediately struck by how silent the passage was. Even her footsteps made no sound. The hallway sloped downward and the stone became smoother, darker. After 20 feet, it opened into a chamber. Books lined the walls, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, but they weren't printed. Each one was bound in a strange, pale leather. No titles, no markings. She approached one and opened it. The pages weren't paper, they were skin. Thin, stretched and inked with trembling handwriting. Names, dates, fragments of memory. Her stomach twisted. She recoiled, nearly dropping the book. That's when she heard it again, that whispering of parchment and breath. She turned, flashlight swinging wildly. There was something standing just beyond the light's edge. Tall, draped in layers of what looked like robes but moved like loose pages. Its face was featureless, flat except for 2 small vertical slits where eyes might have been. Its hands were too long, and in them it held an open book, ink bleeding into the pages as if freshly written. Dana didn't speak. She backed away slowly, trying to retrace her steps, but the hallway was no longer there. Behind her, the chamber had grown, stretching outward with impossible geometry. New shelves rose in silence. More books appeared. And then a voice, dry as wind through dead leaves. "Read." Dana's throat closed. She raised her weapon instinctively. "Put your hands, your whatever, put them where I can see them." The thing didn't move. "Read," it repeated louder. She fired. The bullet passed through it, striking one of the bookshelves behind. No blood, no sound, just paper fluttering as if startled. The being did not react. Instead, it stepped closer and held out the book. Against every instinct, Dana glanced down. The name at the top of the page was hers. Beneath it, dates, memories, things only she should have known. The moment her mother died in the hospital, her first kiss behind the football bleachers, the guilt she carried over Eli's brother going missing in very woods 2 years ago. "No," she whispered. "How do you know this?" The figure tilted its head, and for the first time she felt it. Not malice, but hunger. This place, it wasn't built to house knowledge. It was built to feed on it. Dana turned and ran. Shelves twisted in front of her, the room rearranging itself. Her flashlight sputtered, dimmed, died. In the blackness, pages rustled like wings. Then A light, faint, flickering. She sprinted toward it, crashing through a stack of books. Her boots hit hardwood. Real wood. The library. She emerged from the hidden passage, gasping, drenched in sweat. The entrance had vanished, no trace of the hallway. Just an old stone wall and a few toppled shelves. Dana backed away, heart pounding. She didn't report what she saw. Instead, she walked out into the night, locking the doors behind her. As she drove home, one thought consumed her. The book had more pages, and her story wasn't done. Julia sat alone in the cramped motel room, the dull hum of the air conditioner the only sound breaking the silence. Her fingers trembled as she traced the glyphs she'd copied from the skin-bound book Dana had shown her. Something about them pulsed beneath her skin, like a secret vibrating just out of reach. Across the room, Harris leaned back in a creaky chair, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. "You really think this is more than folklore?" he asked, voice rough from too little sleep. Julia nodded. "The symbols correspond to memories. Not just any memories, but living fragments, encoded in a language of flesh and ink." Harris rubbed his jaw. "So what? People become books? Like some twisted library catalogue?" She swallowed hard. "I think that's exactly what's happening. The skin isn't just skin. It's a vessel. A record." Their investigation had led them here after weeks of chasing down old reports, missing persons, strange markings on remains, rumors of a secret archive buried deep beneath Appalachia. Every lead pointed to the same chilling conclusion. The so-called skin library was real, and it was growing. Julia's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You're closer than you think." She stared at the screen, heart pounding. "They're watching." Harris frowned. "Who's they?" "The ones who keep the library alive." Night fell heavy outside, but inside the room, shadows danced in shapes that felt alive. Julia shivered, wondering how much longer she could resist becoming just another entry in the endless living archive. The dream started with whispers. Not voices exactly, but impressions of speech, a chorus of memories not her own. Julia stood in a field of paper-thin flesh, stretched like parchment over frames of bone and wire. The skins fluttered in a non-existent wind, each one covered in symbols that pulsed faintly with a glow that wasn't light. She reached out to touch one, and it screamed. Julia woke with a jolt, the motel room wrapped in darkness. The clock blinked 3:12 a.m. The air was thick, humid. She reached for her notebook on the nightstand and scribbled down what she could remember. They speak in layers, not words, not thoughts. Memory as heat. From the other bed, Harris stirred. "Another one?" She nodded. "Worse this time." They didn't try to sleep again. By morning, Julia had compiled a working translation key using her scanned glyphs, case archives, and the dream impressions. It wasn't complete, but enough patterns emerged to decipher recurring concepts. Transmit, shelter offering, index, return. "It's a system," she said over burnt coffee. "Like a library catalogue, but alive. The skins are entries." "So whoever ends up like that," Harris said, motioning to the specimen tube, "they volunteered?" "Maybe, or maybe they were chosen." The next lead came from a forgotten bureau document dated 1977. A backwater facility in West Virginia had reported contact with what they referred to as a Mobile Anomalous Knowledge Event. MAE, Harris read aloud. "That sounds like some Cold War lingo. The description matches what we have: missing persons, symbols on human remains, geographic migration. It was last tracked near an abandoned town called Drexel Hollow. Population? 0, since 1983. No clear reason given." That afternoon, they drove 3 hours north into the foothills, passing into the rusted-out belly of forgotten Appalachia. Drexel Hollow wasn't on any modern GPS, but an old bureau map pointed them toward a gravel road that cut into the forest like a wound. They passed collapsed barns, rust-eaten tractors, and finally the remnants of a sign. "Welcome to Drexel Hollow. Est 1901. The town was a husk. Half a dozen buildings, some reduced to rubble, others precariously upright, their frames groaning in the breeze. Nature had reclaimed most of it. Ivy swallowed doorways, trees split foundations, but the silence felt curated, not abandoned, preserved. They parked near what might have been the town hall. Julia stepped out and immediately felt the shift. The air was wrong here. Denser, like she'd walked into the deep end of a pool. Harris lit a cigarette, eyes scanning the buildings. "You feel that?" Like we're not supposed to be here. Like we already were, he muttered. They checked the buildings one by one. Dust-covered furniture, collapsed ceilings, mould-black walls. Nothing useful until they reached the old library. It was barely standing. Books long since rotted or devoured by insects. But on the far wall, hidden behind a fallen shelf, was a section of skin nailed into place. "Third one," Harris said. "Not just skin," Julia whispered. This one was different. Thicker, older. The glyphs were etched with what looked like bone fragments instead of ink. At the center was a symbol she hadn't seen before, a spiral with 3 lines branching outward like roots. She reached out and, without touching it, felt the heat. Memory as heat. As she watched, the glyphs shifted. Not literally. The skin didn't move. But her perception of it changed. The symbols rearranged themselves in her mind, like it knew she was watching. "It's reacting," she said. "To what? Me." Suddenly, from deeper in the building, a sharp thud. They turned. Another thud. Closer. Harris drew his weapon. Julia pulled the specimen tube from her bag and backed toward the doorway. The sound grew louder. Not footsteps, but something dragging. Then silence. "We need to move," she whispered. They exited quickly, heading for the SUV. As they reached it, Harris froze. Across the road, in the window of a collapsed house, a figure watched them. Thin, pale. Its skin looked translucent. Not wounded, but unfinished. It stared with eyes too wide, too wet. In its hands it held something, a piece of skin. Harris raised his gun. "Don't," Julia said. "It's not attacking." The figure tilted its head, then turned and vanished into the building. Julia whispered, "It was showing us..." "Showing us what?" She looked down at the skin in her hands, then back toward the house. Where to go next? The following morning, the sun struggled to pierce the thick Appalachian fog as Julia and Harris sat around a makeshift campfire near the outskirts of Drexel Hollow. The chill in the air was more than just cold. It was the kind of heavy silence that pressed on your chest, reminding you that some things weren't meant to be disturbed. Julia traced her fingers along the specimen tube. The preserved skin inside a stark reminder of how close they were to something both ancient and terrifying. "We have to understand what it's trying to tell us," she said quietly. "The glyphs, the memories, the library itself. It's all connected." Harris poked at the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the sky. "So where do we start? We've got some symbol codes and a creepy skin archive, but what now?" Julia pulled out her worn notebook, pages filled with sketches and notes. "The spiral glyph. I keep coming back to it. Roots branching outward. Maybe it's a map or a key." Harris squinted. "Maybe it points to the heart of this thing, whatever this thing is." They decided to return to the town and search for any other clues, old maps, diaries, even local legends they could find. Drexel Hollow's few remaining structures held little hope, but sometimes desperation drove discovery. Inside the collapsed town hall, they found a dusty ledger. Its leather cover cracked, pages yellowed with age. Julia flipped through it carefully, her flashlight casting long shadows on the faded ink. Names, dates, occupations. But what caught her eye was a series of cryptic entries labelled simply as the Custodians. The notes were fragmentary, mentioning rituals, sacrifices, and the gathering of skin-bound truths. "Custodians?" Harris asked, lowering his voice. "Like caretakers?" "Exactly. They were probably the ones managing the library, keeping the archive alive." Julia scanned further and found a crudely drawn map tucked between the pages, showing a network of tunnels beneath the town, with a central chamber marked by the spiral glyph. They decided to explore. Armed with flashlights, climbing gear, and cautious optimism, Julia and Harris descended into the dark belly of Drexel Hollow. The air grew colder and damp. The walls shimmered with an oily residue, and faint echoes whispered from the depths. The tunnel walls bore symbols similar to those in the skin-bound books, pulsing faintly under their flashlight beams. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a massive chamber. The room was circular, walls lined with racks of preserved skins, each glowing faintly with bioluminescent ink. At the center, a stone pedestal held an open tome, its pages blank except for the spiral glyph glowing softly. Julia stepped forward, feeling the weight of 1,000 stories pressing on her soul. "This is it," she whispered, "the heart of the skin library." Suddenly, the chamber trembled. The glyph on the tome pulsed faster and the walls seemed to breathe. A voice echoed through the room, soft but insistent. Remember, preserve, repeat. Julia's heart hammered as the glyph flared and the pages began to fill with words, memories, names, faces. The library was alive, growing, demanding. They were no longer visitors. They were becoming part of the collection. The weight of the chamber pressed down on Julia and Harris as the glowing glyphs danced across the skin-bound volumes lining the walls. The voice echoed again, a soft, relentless chant, remember, preserve, repeat. Julia's fingers trembled as she reached toward the open tome. The pages shimmered, rippling like liquid, revealing scenes not her own, faces of people long gone, their memories frozen in time. She saw flashes of laughter, sorrow, betrayal, and fear. The stories weren't just recorded here, they were alive. Harris scanned the chamber nervously. This place, it's like a tomb and a library all at once. But why? Who made this? Julia shook her head. Maybe it's not a who, but a what. Something ancient. Something that consumes memory to survive. A sudden rumble shook the ground beneath them. The glowing ink flared and the voices grew louder, overlapping in a chorus of whispers and cries. We have to get out, Harris urged, stepping back. Julia hesitated, drawn to the book's mesmerizing pages. But as the chamber pulsed, she realized the library wasn't content with visitors. It wanted keepers. From the shadows, a figure emerged, pale, cloaked in layers of skin stitched together, its eyes deep pools of endless stories. The Custodian. It moved with unnatural grace, extending a hand toward Julia. Join us, it intoned, voice both inviting and commanding. Become part of the memory. Preserve the truth. Julia felt a pull, a desperate need to belong, to be remembered. But beneath the allure was a cold void, a hunger that could never be sated. Harris stepped forward, shouting, Julia, no! The Custodian's gaze shifted, and in that moment Julia broke free from its grasp, dragging Harris toward the exit. The chamber groaned as shelves began to collapse, skin pages fluttering like dying birds. They ran through twisting tunnels, the library's voice chasing them, promising eternal remembrance if only they would stay. Bursting into the cold night air, Julia and Harris gasped for breath, the weight of the library's grasp slipping but never gone. Behind them, the entrance sealed shut, the skin library retreating into shadow once more, waiting for its next visitors. The sun was barely a pale glow on the horizon when Julia and Harris finally stopped running, collapsing against the gnarled roots of an ancient oak tree at the edge of the forest. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, lungs burning from the cold night air. Julia clutched the specimen tube tightly, her knuckles white. The skin inside no longer glowed but seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive even in its captive state. We made it out, Harris whispered, voice trembling. But for how long? Julia shook her head. The library doesn't forget, it's still with us, in here. She tapped her temple. In here. She looked at the vial again. We have a piece of it now. Harris's eyes flickered with unease. What if it's a curse? No, Julia said firmly, it's a key. They both knew that returning to normal life was impossible. The skin library had imprinted itself on their minds, whispering secrets just out of reach. Days passed, and the nightmares worsened. Julia awoke drenched in sweat, seeing faces in the shadows, hearing the soft rustle of pages turning. Harris grew distant, his eyes haunted by memories that weren't his own. Determined to fight back, Julia pored over her notes, searching for a way to sever the connection. She discovered references to an ancient ritual, the unbinding, a ceremony meant to release the souls trapped within the skins, freeing both the victims and the living from the library's grasp. The ritual required a gathering of the Custodian's relics, tokens of memory, and the presence of one who had glimpsed the heart of the library. Julia and Harris had both. Their journey was far from over. As twilight settled over the mountains, they prepared to return to Drexel Hollow, ready to face the lingering horrors and confront the true nature of the skin library before it claimed them completely. They arrived in Drexel Hollow under a heavy sky, clouds sagging low as if weighed down by unseen sorrow. The town was even quieter than before, the forest's fingers creeping closer to swallow the crumbling buildings whole. Julia and Harris moved cautiously, carrying their equipment and the specimen tube like fragile relics. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old secrets. They made their way to the tunnel entrance they had discovered days earlier, now partially obscured by overgrown roots and fallen branches. Julia cleared the debris, revealing the yawning maw leading down into darkness. Before descending, they set up a small altar at the entrance, a circle of stones etched with protective runes Julia had painstakingly transcribed from the skin glyphs. Candles flickered in the chill, casting long shadows that danced against the ancient trees. Harris looked at Julia, his jaw tight. "We don't know what's waiting down there." She nodded, steeling herself. "But we know what we're fighting for." The descent was slower this time. Every step echoed in the cold silence, the walls shimmering faintly with the same bioluminescent ink as before. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, thick with a presence that felt like watching eyes. At the chamber's heart, the skin-bound tomes still lined the walls, their glow dimmed but persistent. The stone pedestal awaited, empty except for a collection of relics, fragments of bone, shards of inked skin, and a cracked mirror that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. Julia carefully arranged the relics on the pedestal, whispering the words of the unbinding ritual. Harris stood guard, eyes scanning the shadows. As she spoke, the glyphs on the walls began to shift, rearranging themselves into intricate patterns that swirled like a vortex. The chamber trembled, and a cold wind stirred, carrying whispers of release and despair. From the darkness emerged the Custodian, its form flickering like a candle flame caught in a breeze. Its eyes glowed with ancient knowledge and sorrow. "You seek to undo what has been preserved," it said, voice a mournful echo. Julia met its gaze. "We seek freedom, for those trapped, and for ourselves." The Custodian extended a hand, revealing a book bound in the darkest skin Julia had seen. It opened, and the pages bled memories of pain and sacrifice. The ritual reached its crescendo as Julia finished the final incantation. The chamber flooded with blinding light, the glyphs dissolving into a cascade of shimmering dust. When the light faded, the Custodian was gone. The walls lay bare, and the oppressive presence lifted. Julia and Harris emerged from the tunnels into a dawn that felt like a new beginning. But as they looked back at Drexel Hollow, a whisper rode the morning breeze: remember, preserve, repeat. Months later, Julia sat in a small sunlit cabin far from the shadows of Drexel Hollow. The specimen tube lay sealed on a shelf, its faint pulse now silent, a remnant of a nightmare she hoped was finally behind her. Harris joined her at the worn wooden table, a rare smile breaking through his usual guarded expression. "We did it," he said quietly. "The skin library is no longer a prison." Julia nodded, though the weight of what they'd uncovered lingered like a ghost. But memories have a way of slipping through cracks. The past never fully dies. Outside, the Appalachian forest stretched endlessly, alive and watching. Somewhere deep within, the whispers had ceased, for now. Their ordeal had left scars, but also purpose. They vowed to protect the forgotten, to tell the stories buried beneath layers of flesh and time. And as Julia gazed out the window, she wondered if the library was truly gone, or simply waiting, patient and eternal, for the next curious soul to wander into the dark. Because in the mountains, some secrets never stay buried.